Hello and welcome to the Return of Gnosis podcast. I'm your host, Nick Reed, here with co-host Michael Curving. Today we're going to be talking about the Feather of Truth, which is an ancient mystical symbol used in Kemet, or ancient Egypt. And we're going to talk about how it relates to our generations today in the pursuit of that non-discursive cognition of reality that includes the spiritual and the secular elements of reality that we call Gnosis, an alternative knowledge than the one that we get in school. Well, let's get into it. So, I wrote this piece on the Return of Gnosis blog the other day. And let me tell you why I wrote it. I wrote about this experience I had that relates to redemption or salvation. It was a redemptive type experience. And I wrote about this because redemption and salvation is a concept in itself that I have absolutely abhorred. Like nature abhors a vacuum, okay? Because to me, there is no salvation or redemption. It was this concept built by governments and religions to enslave people and convince them that they did not have inside of them what they needed in order to be free or be good people. That they had to be saved from their own bad nature. That they needed government to tell them what to do because they just weren't capable of knowing right and wrong for themselves or learning from their mistakes. Government, who of course was made up of a bunch of people. And church, who was made up of a bunch of people. So you understand where I'm coming from. I grew up Roman Catholic. I had this bad taste of religiosity and dogma and crusadism in my mouth, and all these concepts that came with it, like you hear about the crucifixion and so on. Then I had this experience that actually took away a lot of the psychological and emotional baggage I had carried. And honestly, I'm talking about it like this because it wasn't necessarily something that I did for myself. Yes, I was open to it. Yes, I participated in it. But at the same time, this was an experience that was shared with me by somebody else. My younger sibling, brother, John, whom I was not expecting it to come. So what happens is I pull up with him to one of his best buddies events, which is an event where you get together with a bunch of intellectually and developmentally disabled people. And you give them companionship and company and play games and take them out to baseball games and stuff like that. Being my first time showing up, he decides maybe I should debrief him before we go in there. They say things and do things differently than people who don't hang out or aren't in this club are used to. So he lets me know, hey Nick, listen, I just got to tell you, before we go in here, there's nothing you can do or say that's going to change the way that these people are. So if they do anything or say anything that sounds funny or you don't like, you're just going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to either accept them as they are and love them like that or not. But they're not going to change or do anything different. They are who they are. Which made total sense. I mean, I totally got it. We're going into a club with lots of developmentally challenged people. But something else happened. So, in my mind, I realize developmentally challenged or intellectually challenged people can do no wrong in my eyes. Anything they do, even in court, you can plead in insanity, and that's another category in the mind of which someone can do no wrong, right? They're not culpable. And so also, in the same way I realized children can do no wrong. That's a category for people on this planet who, in my mind, there's no place in my heart for blame or judgment or any of the other things that there definitely is a place in my heart for everybody else. So this was a big cognitive dissonance that I dealt with experiencing this while I was there, because how much are we certain that we are all 100% neurologically perfect? And that even begs the question, what is neurological perfection? Is there even such a thing, developmental perfection? Is this just another category of the mind? Because if there's not, then it would mean to some degree that we are all acting in some degree in our ignorance. Just like, at what point does a child grow up and we say, now you are 100% accountable for all of your actions and having well knowledge about the full extent of the consequences of everything that you say and do? At what point? 18? In our culture, a lot of times we say 18. Our judicial system is 17. You can be tried as an adult. Then again, you can't drink till you're 21. But at 18, you can go fight a war and buy lottery tickets and porn. And then you got 15 in some cultures. 17 you can drink in Italy. At what point does a person become culpable, where they merit blame and condemnation or punishment? And I think that this problem is just as difficult as determining at what point somebody in reality is mentally or developmentally handicapped, when we really don't have a clear-cut, categorical control group for this model human being, right? We have variations in all directions. North, south, east, west. We're all just different, right? And so this gets difficult. But then it's like all the blame and the shame and the condemnation that goes on in this world from people toward everybody, including the Hitlers, including the most evil people of this world. If it's not justified, then it amounts to nothing. And what about all the self-blame and the guilt and the shame I've had for doing things wrong and stuff? If I was acting to some degree in my ignorance too. I know that I'm not all-knowing. I'll never be all-knowing, no matter how hard I try. Neither will you, right? And so it's like, it's a really liberating experience. But at the same time, you feel still like you're doing something wrong, because this is the same trouble that Carl Jung got in, where he was accused of being a Nazi sympathizer because he would not subscribe to that absolute duality, where in order to be able to judge what the Nazis were doing as wrong, being genocide and a number of other related activities, that you must create an experience of yourself that is categorically separated from them, and you are unable to experience them inside of yourself and yourself inside of them, even if as just merely a potentiality, that somehow they were so foreign that they were not even made up of the same universal star dust that you are, that they are so alien that they don't merit to some degree of our empathy and understanding, in the same way that you would a child who does something wrong. Right? They don't know any better. In the same way that you would approach your child. And this is a difficult topic that I want to pass to you. I'm honored that you're here, Michael. I appreciate you being here every time that we do this podcast. Your insights are invaluable, and I just want to hear what you have to say.
Well, first of all, Nick, and to everyone out there, I want you to know that I actually am all-knowing, and so I'm just going to drop the mic right now, and I'm out of here, baby. No, I share that sentiment, and actually something I've pondered quite a bit is to what extent, having and amassing and accumulating ever more knowledge about the world and about ourselves, just in terms of facts and calculations and whatever bits that we can store in our neurons, whether that really is a viable solution for anything, and whether that's going to help us move forward personally in our own lives and as a world together to heal and solve our problems. In other words, whether or not knowledge itself is enough. I often think, what if I could just instantly download right now all of the contents of the Library of Alexandria, the Library of Congress, of every book that's ever been written? Will that, all of that extra knowledge somehow make me any more capable, more wise, more able to meet the challenges of life, and will it make me freer, or will it just be a bunch of stuff that I've accumulated that actually ladens me down and creates even more of a prism for me to look through. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Wanted to return to, let's see, something that you touched on, which is blame and condemnation, and what good has it ever done anyone? What good has blaming anyone ever done in a situation? Is it actually productive? Certainly, we look out at the world and we can identify circumstances where individuals have wronged others, and therefore there's a degree of accountability that needs to go along with that. But what's the difference, between blaming and condemning, whether we're blaming and condemning others, or whether we turn that same focus inward on ourselves, try to blame and condemn ourselves for things that we may not understand, that we're acting out of our own ignorance, and whether that's really just a healthy way of relating to others or to ourselves. If we're not to blame ourselves or condemn ourselves, then what are we to do? And I was reminded also of something that I've been told. I have some friends that I've known that have been through AA, which is the 12-step program for Alcoholics Anonymous. And they've talked about something. There's apparently a thing called the sick man's prayer, which is something that I guess one says to oneself as a reminder that, for example, if you have someone that you went to visit them in the hospital and they're sick, maybe they've got cancer or some other sort of an illness, you wouldn't stand over that person, hover over their bed and just call them an asshole for having cancer, or blame them, or judge them, or try to put them down and make them feel less than themselves. You would want that person to become better and recognize that it's of no use to sit there and just cast blame. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help them. But so just as kind of a way of saying and seeing that we should tend to try to treat others as we'd want to be treated. Again, goes back to the golden rule. And so I thought a little bit about that as you were speaking, and I don't know, maybe you can touch on some of the things I've just said.
Well, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's kind of a moral maxim that all cultures have gone by. Speaking of which, it seems most cultures also have some form of recognition of the ignorance that we are acting in, or the knowledge of our ignorance. That's something that I'm trying to bring up that is a real lost wisdom of the world. The knowledge of the limits of our knowledge, or the knowledge of our ignorance. A lot of times people live by this belief that we know everything, that we know exactly what's going on, that there's not any kind of degree to which even what you're doing is out of your hands. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because a lot of what good people out there are doing, raising a lot of awareness and bringing a lot of information about the lack of accountability in government and how we have such giant hierarchical systems where each person is just doing the command of the supervisor above in this giant chain link, and everybody can deny responsibility for their actions. I mean, even the Nazi war crimes, they called it Amtssprache, when they asked him, how were you able to commit such terrible crimes against humanity? Wasn't it hard? And they said, actually, it was easy. They said, tell us how. And they said, we call it Amtssprachen. Sprachen is language, and then Amts is like office. So it's like bureaucrat language. And they say, give us an example. I had to. They made me. Superior's orders. It's all language that expresses a sense of denying accountability or responsibility for action. I just flipped a switch. I just turned a knob. I just opened a door. And then all together, what are you doing? You're burning Jews in an oven. You know what I'm saying? But each person is just doing a minor part. And so systemically, these crimes were happening. But because no one person was fully responsible or accountable for having done the whole thing, they were all able to write it off in their brains. And this is what's going on a large scale today, where everybody's able to deny responsibility. There's no accountability, and we have this giant emotional backwardness and this moral backwardness and emotional underdevelopment. We have a technical and material overdevelopment today. And most of the blogs that we're going to talk about are going to address this situation and how it affects people being able to live according to some of the greatest truths and mysteries that have ever been valued by human experience throughout for thousands of years, millennium. So what we're talking about today is the other side of the coin. What we're talking about today is also the truth that no one is all-knowing. Nobody knows the full extent of the consequences of their actions. And everybody is in fact doing the best that they can do, or else they would be doing better. And everybody is also doing what they think is the best thing that should be done, relatively speaking. Or else they would have done something else. It is their good. Now, whether they have the same moral understanding as you or not, and this isn't Nazi sympathy either. This is the other truth. Now, does this mean that you shouldn't oppose evils with all of your strength and might? That you shouldn't react repulsively to some of the crimes that you see going on in the world? Absolutely you should. You should rise up in the streets like you don't. But at the same time, there is no absolute universal evilness in humanity. This duality doesn't exist between good and evil. And this is what got Carl Jung in trouble that I'm talking about. And that's why I'm bringing it up today. Because it's something that we all deny. We think, oh, I would never say that. There is not even 0.001% goodness in a, say, terrorist. Oh, did I say terrorist? Terrorist is the new heretic. This is what was going on with the Gnostics back in 300 AD. They were being prosecuted because the way that they not only believed, but the way that they lived when they expressed and manifested their beliefs went against the central dogma of the day, which wasn't a religious authority. Today we have a secular authority, but by many standards it's really a religion of government, and a system of control that's really no different. But to go against it is very, very difficult. Because you give up your psychological, your emotional, and even your physical security to do so. And so to be able to admit and to release yourself of all of the hate and the blame that you have inside of your heart that you've harbored for, if you're a Packers fan, the Dallas Cowboys, or if you're a Democrat for the Republican or vice versa, or if you are an anarchist for all the statists, or if you are a statist for all the anarchists, or for the terrorists, or for the Hitlers of the world, or for everybody. We all have a reason that we justify the categorical hate and projection of some absolute evil onto somebody else. But as Carl Jung says, the degree to which we do that, we are unable to connect to a certain level of depth within ourselves at which we are one and the same. They are made of the same star dust, that they are made of the same life force that's pumping their heart, is pumping our hearts, pumping every frog and insect's little heart, and that at the same deep, deep, deep level, that exists within us as a potentiality, and therefore we lack compassion. And the more this world lacks compassion, the more and more that you're actually not going to be able to do anything about the very thing that you're giving all this hate and condemnation about. Because, as they say in the Dhammapada, as they've expressed in culture and tradition after tradition throughout human history, hate never yet has dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. And we know this intellectually in our heads. We do. But to actually acknowledge it in the heart, to be able to experience it on multiple different levels of which it is true, where it strikes you in your bones to where you know it and you can do it without having to rationalize it and say to yourself, well, don't say that. Now you know that hate doesn't dispel hate. To be able to say it without having to have a thought compel you to do it. Beyond the intellectual level, to know it in the core of your being is a completely different story. And that's why I'm trying to speak about it from this level. It's not just intellectual. So that's why you go to returnofgnosis.com. Look at the blog, and you can see my personal experience. We bring it to you real from the heart every single day. We experience it in our lives, and we journal about it. Ancient truths without all the dogma, without all the religiosity, but yet the same emotional charge and transformative power of personal myth. We're talking about a supreme meaning brought to you by yours truly, nobody, Joe Schmo. So if you can't get it from us, I tell you what, if you got a problem with authority, here's your source. Boom. Michael, you got anything to add to that?
Sure, Nick, I do. And man, I appreciate your passion more than anything, man. It gets me fired up inside in a good way. And I have a personal connection that I want to kind of open up. And I'm going to open up to you right here, Nick, like mano a mano about this, because it's so important. It's important to me because I'm feeling these feelings. I'm watching you just speak your truth and just watch it emanate, flow from you. Just watch the life force like just coming out of you. It's powerful, man, and I love it. And so one thing that I want to add to this and bring into the conversation on a really personal note, and really how this speaks to me, is that I often tend to look at myself in a judgmental way over certain things that I have not perfected or feel that am less than maybe adequate in. And this is just kind of a lifelong thing. I tend to be a real perfectionist, have always been, and this is something I've had to come to a much greater understanding about myself and how to let that go, because that's really been a hindrance to me more than anything. And I find myself, even by default, heading in that direction as I sit here and I watch you so fluid and so free. And I know as for myself, if I look at, if I try to pull myself apart and I take myself in the past, right, and I try to make an object out of myself and I look at all my past thoughts and experiences, I have a tendency to think about myself that I am not such a fluent speaker, that I don't have that gift of, gab and that real kind of easygoing, outgoing, just freewheeling way of talking. I've always been kind of introverted, but see, these are all things that I just tell myself. These are things that I've learned over time that I have internalized, but aren't necessarily true for the rest of my life. We as human beings are constantly learning and growing, and we're expanding past our boundaries. We're going to new heights, and so I, even in this process of learning to navigate, doing this podcast, which I'm so podcast, which I'm so grateful to be a part of and be here doing this, I'm challenging myself, and I'm opening up, and I'm even letting go of that voice, that inner monologue, that inner critic that tries to condemn my own self and put me down and say, oh, you can't, you're not every bit as good as Nick is, and I know that's just a false way of seeing, and so it's great to have that, and that's something that's so much more than any piece of knowledge. I could have read that in a book somewhere. Somebody could have told it to me. Somebody could have said, well, you should never compare yourself to other people because that's not productive, and that'll not get you, where you want to go. And they would be right if they said that, but those are also just words. But there's something very different than somebody giving me the words, telling it to me, or maybe my reading it in a book. And there's a difference between that and me actually having it, like you said, Nick, in my bones. So it's not just coming from the neocortex. It's just coming out of my heart, man. Coming out of that heart-centered magnetic field. And that's where I am right now in this moment. And what helps me get there sometimes is when I actually confront the things that I'm shy about, or that in the past I wouldn't have even wanted to bring a subject like this up. I would just let it go and sit in the back of my brain, rattle around, and then it would cause me friction. And so that would be the thing that would prevent me from actually rising to the occasion and rising to be able to just talk and speak from the heart, which is what I feel like I'm doing right now. And so for me, a big part of this is this kind of modern day gnosis is, let's just put all the cards on the table, and let's, for me personally, that means if I've got things rolling around in my head that are kind of floating around, maybe subconscious, half conscious, semi-conscious, I take them down and I just put them out there and let the cards fall where they may, and that's how I move forward and grow. And so that's what I'm bringing into this conversation right now. And hell, it feels good, man.
I'm great. It should feel good, because for millennium we have been looking at things indirectly. We've been learning things through doctrine, just like natives have been taken from their homes and their families and taken to missions where they've learned about their world indirectly through indoctrination and reading about it in books, and not learning about it directly through experience of it, through relationship. And this right here, what you're describing, if I'm reflecting correctly, it sounds like you're talking about the difference between knowing something like somebody tells it to you, right? Yeah, I could see that. You have the image of it, and having the actual thing that the image is of. A direct cognition. And that's our definition of gnosis, ladies and gentlemen. It is the direct, non-discursive cognition of reality that includes both the secular as well as the spiritual elements, because they are both here. If you have dark, then you will have light, ladies and gentlemen, and it goes vice versa. So if you live in a secular world and you believe that 100% that there is nothing but a secular world, ask yourself this: do you see light around you? Look at your eyes and your perception. Do you see light? Because if there is light, then you can bet that there exists the potential for darkness. And if you look in front of you and you see many things, then you can bet that there will exist one thing. And if you look around you and you see man, then you bet there's going to be woman. Because every single polarity you can imagine precludes the existence of the other. And both of them together preclude the existence of something a little more hidden and secret, but it's still there. Now, speaking of gnosis, speaking of the spiritual aspect of reality, if you experience the world as secular, then within it exists the seed of its opposite, the possibility for you to experience the spiritual world. And if you live in a spiritual world only and deny the secular world and all of its bane and lowly frequency ways of living, then you can bet that within that spiritual exists the seed of the opposite, that it will grow inside of you like it does inside of every priest and rabbi who gets a hold of a little boy. Will grow inside of you like a vine, because you are meant to be a whole person. You are a reflection of the entire universe. A grain of sand in how's William Blake's quote go? Anyway, we're going to forget about that because I don't have time for it. But gnosis is that truth. It is a truth. It's not a spiritual truth. It's not a secular truth like 1 + 1 is 2, or that Germany is located between this and that country. It's not a truth like Brahman equals Atman, some kind of esoteric principle. It is both at the same time. A non-discursive. That's it. It's beyond discourse. It's something that's true at both levels. Paradoxically, you don't know how it's true, but it's true. Like the fact that Hitler was an evil, evil dude. And at the same time, a blind, poor child human being. Both true. Both true. Ladies and gentlemen. And so are you. You are acting in your ignorance at every second. And at the same time, you are absolutely divine. Absolutely divine. And so intelligent and smart and capable. And capable of things like free will. I mean, deer are born and they can take off on a sprint. Bugs are born and they fly off in the air. And we're the most helpless creature because we're born free. Free from the old chains. And yet at the same time, we are 5 blind men trying to describe an elephant. It's a paradox, but it's the way that it is, and they're both there. And this is important. It's important because people fret all of the things that they call the bad experiences in life and the hard times that they have and the things that they try and avoid that they think about. Yeah, wash your hands after you go to the bathroom before you eat. Yeah, there's don't avoid that dark alley, if you're not feeling safe. It's not some kind of theory of relativity. This isn't the sophists here trying to convince you that it's all relative and that nothing matters, or that, everything is good, everything's fine, everything's okay. Go ahead and eat hemlock and poison, But in the end, it is all okay. And I'm bringing this truth because of who I'm speaking to, and this is Western culture. So if I were speaking to a native Indian, I might be trying to bring the Western truth. But because we're the Western and we've got this dualistic way of thinking of things, I'm trying to bring the other truth so that you can have a whole, complete life and experience your life as full. And you yourself be full and be whole because you experience everything in its paradoxical wholeness of both good and bad and light and dark and up and down and in and out and man and woman and strong and weak and so on and so forth and back. And then back again. And on that note, you are listening to the Return of Gnosis podcast with Nick Reed and Michael Curving. Stay tuned next week for we'll be talking about something else wonderful, but I bet you it's related to Gnosis.